Well, the College Football Playoff Selection Committee has set a very unfortunate and dangerous precedent today, and that is rules for thee, not for me. BYU and the Big 12 can be punished for losing in blowout fashion in the conference championship game, but Alabama and the SEC, no way, no chance. Welcome into Open for Business, the best Big 12 podcast on planet Earth. I am your host, John Kurtz. Thank you for joining me here this early afternoon. College football playoff rankings are out, as I'm sure you are well aware. We're going to break down Texas Tech's draw. Tech gets a top 4 seed. I cannot wait to watch the Texas Tech defense put Dante Moore in hell in the second round of the college football playoff. BYU left out, which is no surprise, but the thing that really gets me is that BYU did drop while Alabama did not when they played basically the exact same conference championship game. And once again, the biggest issue continues to be not even that BYU gets left out. It's the fact that BYU gets left out of the discussion. Okay, that's the issue. And that's what I'm going to attack here to begin the show. Please, as you file in, like the video, subscribe to the channel. All that stuff really helps. I'm talking college football from a Big 12 perspective all the time here on this channel. Make sure you subscribe to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter as well. 5,600 plus Big 12 fans do. It's totally free in your inbox twice a week. Okay. College football playoff bracket is out. Here you go. This is what we've got. You can see there Texas Tech earns a 4 seed. More on this later, but I like the fact that Texas Tech gets on Indiana's side of the bracket as good as they looked last night and avoids Ohio State and Georgia. I think Texas Tech has to be very pleased with this. There is no BYU there. Duke won. James Madison got in. That was one of the other points of contention. And, of course, everybody is talking about the fact that Miami makes it in over Notre Dame. Finally, the committee decided to use head-to-head there. So that gives you quick synopsis of where things are at. I am going to get back to this later when we're talking about Texas Tech and the actual draw there. So here's the thing with BYU. All right. They were the second team out of the field. Notre Dame is the first team out of the field. So BYU drops back a spot to number 12. Alabama not only made the field, but stayed at number 9. And that is the part that just kills me and is so emblematic of how this entire discussion has happened, basically with BYU thrown on the outside looking in as almost like an asterisk. Like, hey, BYU doesn't matter here. The big boys are talking, and yeah, we know where BYU's at in the rankings, but that's cute. Kick them to the curb. How many times over the past week when Alabama, Notre Dame, and Miami were being discussed did we see the graphic that went college football playoff ranking 9, 10, 12? And then maybe if you're lucky, you'd get a little asterisk at the top that would be like, BYU is number 11, by the way. Just were not even seriously considered, which is insane. And it's the same thing that happened last year when BYU should have absolutely been in the discussion with SMU and Miami. By the way, an SMU team that BYU beat on the road last year, and they just were not even a part of the discussion. It was just so actively an effort from ESPN and anybody nationally who was talking about this to not even include BYU. And I know I'll get people in the comments saying, oh, it's just a Big 12 fan crying, BYU fans crying. Look, here is your proof, okay? Look at these resumes side by side. Shout out to my guys at the Gambling Gauchos. BYU an 11-2 record, Notre Dame 10-2, Miami 10-2. Strength of schedule, BYU 22. Emphatically better than both Notre Dame and Miami. Strength of record, BYU, better than Notre Dame and Miami. If we are talking about best wins this season, Miami, I will grant you, beat Notre Dame. That is a better win than BYU's win over Utah. Fair enough. But BYU's win over Utah is better than Notre Dame's win over USC, which would be its best win. So again, not even in the discussion. I know you'll say, well, John, Notre Dame didn't even make the field. I get it, but BYU was not a serious part of this discussion and got treated differently than Alabama, which I guess isn't surprising after an entire year of Greg Sankey campaigning that the SEC should get overly preferential treatment. My beef, I want to emphasize once again, is not, look, I think BYU earned a spot in the field based on its resume. And I would prefer to reward teams so much more based on resume than just eye test. Okay. And I know I seem to differ from a lot of the national folks about this. I just listened to Kirk Herbstreit railing on about that. He has turned into one of the worst voices in the sport on this front, and is just infuriating to listen to these days. But if you come at me with an argument for why, hey, Notre Dame just looks like they're playing much better football right now. Alabama has a higher ceiling than BYU, as evidenced by the win that it had at Georgia. Like, I understand these arguments against BYU, and I won't totally dismiss them. I think there's a tendency from people to think if you're arguing on behalf of BYU and defending BYU, that you are just this completely unreasonable, ignorant Big 12 fan who will not accept any other viewpoint. No, that's not true at all. I understand there are compelling arguments for everybody here. It was a hard decision, man. The committee had really an impossible decision to make. This was tough. I get why it was tough. My issue is that BYU doesn't really get to the table when they absolutely earned a spot at the table. This is kicking BYU to the kids' table when they are fully grown adults. They do not belong at the kids' table. They belong at the table to have a discussion with everybody else. Did you guys watch Alabama rush for -3 yards yesterday? If you're going to come at me with, man, BYU just dominated by Texas Tech again, I'm going to play you a Kirk Herbstreit clip in just a moment where he said exactly that. Did you watch Alabama against Georgia? Alabama looked every bit as bad as BYU did. At least remember, as out of hand as that game got late, it was a 6-point game with 5 minutes to go in the third quarter between BYU and Texas Tech yesterday. Alabama was getting punked from the jump. They were down 21-0 before they scored. Like, these are similar positions. And you'll say, oh, well, Georgia, they were playing Georgia. Well, Georgia's third in the playoff rankings and Texas Tech is fourth. Like, at some point, we have to stop just using this hypothetical, I'm just off on my own bias here about what the SEC is versus the Big 12, and look at what the rankings and resumes say. Texas Tech is one spot behind where Georgia is. It is a nearly identical scenario that both of these two teams played in, and one team gets to stay at 9 and one team has to move back. Now, I would also grant you, if you are going to say that a lot of this BYU moving back is because the committee just really wanted an opportunity to finally jump Miami over Notre Dame, I can definitely understand if you want to be a little conspiratorial about that. Like, I get it. It was definitely a convenient move for the committee. But even if that's the case, the precedent that has been established here is that the Big 12 is expendable. We don't care. We're not worried about backlash from the Big 12. Had we moved Alabama back, or worse, moved Alabama out of the field, Greg Sankey would have been up our rear end for the entire next 365 days, and we'd be getting PowerPoint presentations from him. Or if you really want to go big brain on this, we know that had we punished Alabama, conference championship games would be in jeopardy. Yeah, we punished the Big 12 for their team losing in the Big 12 championship game. It's fine. Conference championship games will still be around. But we do it to Alabama and the SEC, we're going to have a really tectonic impact on the sport. Tectonic plates will start to shift. We will go away from conference championship games. And so we can't do that. That's where we're at, man. And look, I know a lot of you out there are like, well, yeah, duh, John. Of course the Big 12 doesn't get treated like the Big 10 and the SEC. Same with the ACC these days. Okay, I get it, but this is just, this is in your face, blatant evidence of it that we really haven't seen yet. Well, outside of last year, I guess we did. I'm contradicting my own argument there. We saw some of it last year. I think the case is more egregious this year because I think BYU had a much better resume this year than it did last year, even if the bubble to get into the playoff was weaker last year. The tone had just been set all week that BYU was not going to be a serious part of this conversation when they absolutely should have been. Listen to this. I know the audio on this is not perfect, so forgive me on that. But Kirk Herbstreit was talking about BYU yesterday, and I know I saw all of you guys on Twitter sharing this, and I understand your beef completely with this. Listen to how Kirk Herbstreit talks just literally just saying the quiet part out loud about how BYU is treated differently. It's a different scenario that BYU got blown out in its conference championship game. That should matter, but this Alabama-Georgia game that we're watching right now, that should not matter for Alabama.
I'm just saying they have, based on the committee's rankings, and it really didn't come into play. Well, now, after last week's rankings, the only team that was in between them was BYU. And I don't think teams should ever be punished for playing a conference championship game, but in this case, you and I called the game in Lubbock. It was one-sided. I'm just saying they.
Yeah. Thanks, Kirk. You were there at the first game, so that means you're the ultimate authority on all of this. It's maddening, man. It's maddening, but it is what it is. And that's the type of framework that we were dealing with before we even got to the point where the committee is in a room making their final decisions on all of this. And I suppose that doesn't necessarily have an effect on the committee, but you know that it does. You know they've had to hear from Greg Sankey and the SEC media mafia for the last 365 days, the complete offensive that they have been on to try and get more favorable treatment. All of that stuff matters. I would compare it to an official. You can say, hey, an official's not really swayed by a home crowd. They're going to make what they objectively think the right call is. But there have been studies on just human nature. And when you know that a call that you make is going to get 15,000 people screaming at you, or, well, I guess I'm thinking of a basketball arena. How about 100,000 people screaming at you and booing at you? You're going to be more inclined subconsciously to make a call in favor of the home team, right? So the more and more this is just the accepted way that we talk about BYU in college football circles nationally, places outside of here, then the more that's the way everybody is going to act about it. And it becomes reality. You speak it into reality that way. And that's what I hate about all this, man. I really get frustrated about it. I don't think anything's really going to change. We can have the conversation about what does Brett Yormark do in light of this. I asked him on the Big 12 championship game teleconference last week, I guess earlier this week, or still Sunday. I asked him, hey, Greg Sankey has been very aggressive about trying to change the treatment of his teams in the playoff rankings. Do you consider trying to ramp things up or do something differently? And his answer was more or less, well, hey, I am an aggressive commissioner. I'm an outspoken commissioner, I think he said. And let's just wait and see what happens. Well, now we've seen what happened. And it's the second straight year where BYU just has been treated with kid gloves instead of treated like an actual adult. I think it's time to try and crank something up. And Brett Yormark, I know he had another press conference yesterday that I was at before the Big 12 championship game. He was again pushing BYU's resume specifically against Notre Dame, which, the funny part there is that both teams wind up getting left out. But, Yormark was trying just at the very end. And I think that's been my frustration. I know BYU fans, you've shared that frustration for a while, that there wasn't more of a proactive effort weeks ago, more of a trust in BYU weeks ago, that their resume needed to be held up into the same light. The ACC was tweeting a bunch of graphics and stuff about Miami, and I don't know if you want to say that worked or not. I have no idea how much of an impact the ACC actually had on Miami getting into the field or not. But the ACC did seem to be more proactive about it earlier on about Miami, put it that way. So I think it is time for some introspection, deep hard look here. What can we do? What can we do? And I say that understanding that I'm sure folks at the Big 12 would tell me, well, we're also weighing what this is going to look like long term and negotiating the next iteration of the playoff. And we have to kind of play 4D chess here as opposed to just being reactionary to every single time it happens. But it's a trend now, I guess is the point. It's a trend now that we've seen 2 straight years, specifically held up against Miami. BYU be treated unfairly and just not even a part of the discussion. So that to me is the biggest takeaway from the rankings as far as it relates to the Big 12 and what is happening with teams in this conference. Okay, now Texas Tech is a different story. Let's pop into the rankings here. Texas Tech gets the 4 seed. They hung on to that, which was a bit of a concern heading into Saturday for me. Hey, depending on what happens, will Texas Tech be able to still get a first-round bye, or is there some chance? I was worried about Alabama beating Georgia and somehow Bama sliding up there, and you have 2 SEC teams that are getting byes and Tech gets bumped out. No, committee did respect Texas Tech. So if we're talking about eye test, I think that's where the biggest difference that BYU and Texas Tech, the difference between them is like Texas Tech, eye test, best team they played twice this year. They crushed them. What is that? It was 29-7, 34-7, combined like 66-7, whatever that score is. The eye test certainly favored Texas Tech there. And that defense, I mean, they just have one unit, one side of the ball that is so overwhelmingly nasty. And look, here's the other thing. College football is driven by narratives. And just like I outlined in the open, whether people admit it or not, it is totally driven by narratives. And what's the narrative that you always hear about Texas Tech? You heard it yesterday from Joe Tessitore on the broadcast. I was popping in and out of the broadcast while in the press box. And Joe Tessitore is talking about, oh, well, you know, Cody Campbell and all the money that Texas Tech spent on this roster. And there were tweets after Tech won the Big 12 championship game of people, hey, this is proof you can go buy a championship, when everybody in the SEC that's competing at the top, they spent $28 million on their roster too. But for Tech, it has to be the main focal point in the story, and it has to be framed in a negative light. Well, when that's the narrative, people are like, well, they do have a lot of money, so I guess they must be pretty good. They have a lot of money. These guys must be pretty good. That helps. I think that definitely helps Texas Tech here when you're talking about the fate that they wound up receiving in the playoff. But hey, congrats. The Big 12 needs it. However you're going to get it, however it's going to happen, I commend the committee for rewarding the Big 12 in that way. And this is, I don't want to get bogged down completely in the negatives. This is a step in the right direction for a league last year that in late November was having to defend itself against being left out completely, having its conference champion left out completely. There was that discussion for a fleeting moment for about a week or two in late November last year to this year. You have a team with a first round bye that was totally earned, right? Arizona State was a part of the reason, along with Boise last year, that we had to immediately reverse course and change how we did the buys. We're not rewarding conference champs automatically with it. Okay, fine. The Big 12 says we'll just go take a first round bye anyway by having a team good enough. That's a big thing for the league. And I'm excited for Texas Tech's draw here. Like I said, I know Indiana just beat Ohio State last night, and they look really good. Fernando Mendoza makes some big boy throws, man. That guy's got some cojones, especially with everything on the line. It was really fun to watch. Their defense impressed me. I knew Indiana had an offense. I did not know they had a defense that could hold Ohio State to 10 points. It's very impressive. I think Indiana is an excellent team, but I would still take being on Indiana's side of the bracket. If given a choice here, I would take being on Indiana's side of the bracket than being on Ohio State or Georgia's side of the bracket any day of the week. I just would. Some of that is probably me putting a little bit too much faith in the logos, and maybe that will come back to bite me. But I'm happy with this draw for Tech. Oregon, I think, is fairly untested, man. As far as teams in this caliber, in this echelon of college football teams go, I think Oregon is somewhat untested. Again, words that could come back to bite me. But I like this as a team, like even as opposed to like Ole Miss. I think I would rather see Oregon if I were Texas Tech here. The Penn State win I do think was nice early in the year, even though Penn State turned into what they did. That was going into Happy Valley when everything was still at full throat. That's an impressive win for Oregon. They got thumped pretty good by Indiana at home. They won at Iowa, which is a decent win. That was like a, driving rainstorm, cold day, loud crowd. Maybe untested is the wrong word for Oregon. I just think in terms of what their ceiling is, I don't know that it's as high as some of the other potential teams here that Texas Tech could have faced. I mean, frankly, if we're talking about just eye test the way they're playing right now, like Miami, I think I would be more scared of Miami playing Texas Tech, honestly, than I would Oregon. I am very excited to see what Texas Tech can do to Dante Moore. I think Texas Tech's defense will get a chance to make a real statement here for the league in the playoff, because that defense is legitimately national championship caliber good. I think most people are starting to get there now, but probably still don't, at least in terms of how they treat BYU, have a full respect for just how good Texas Tech's defense is. And that's what I am most excited for the nation to see when that game actually happens. Now, JMU, I'm sorry that I'm just railroading you and assuming that you're going to lose the game. But yes, I would assume that Oregon at Autzen Stadium is going to win that game and advance on. It is one team that I would have rather seen. I will tell you definitively, I would have rather seen Texas Tech get there in that game. If Texas A&M could have somehow wound up being the 5 seed, I would have definitely rather seen that. And I think that's a more winnable game than Oregon for sure for Texas Tech. But unfortunately, you are not going to get that. So I think this bracket has opened up to give Texas Tech, I'm not saying they'll get there, but if you were looking for a bracket that gave Texas Tech the best opportunity to make it to the national championship game for the first time for a Big 12 team since TCU was there in 2022, I think this is about as good as you could have hoped for as far as that draw goes. You know, top half of the bracket, Alabama or Oklahoma, if they were somehow to get through Indiana, I mean, sign me up for that all day. Like, I know Bama has the best win in the country this year at Georgia, but they have not looked like that in a long while. Oklahoma is a one-half team. I mean, as much as people will say, like, Tech leans on its defense, give me Tech's offense any day of the week over what Oklahoma has offensively. That's a half team that you would be playing if it's Oklahoma. So I like this. I like this for Texas Tech. I like that Baron Morton seemed to me to be a little more spry, not as gimpy on the hairline fracture that he's dealing with in the game yesterday against BYU. And that gives me optimism that as we move forward here, Baron Morton can make it through 3 games if he needs to in the college football playoff. He's going to get extra time to rest now with a bye. Like, I think that's really important. I know, and even the broadcast lamented this, which I appreciate them for that the idea of Texas Tech hosting a college football playoff game that's awesome. Like, Lubbock hosting a college football playoff game would have been a scene. That would have been incredible. And I would have loved to have seen it. And I wish that you could get it in the second round of the playoffs. I would be in favor of just doing that all the way through, but I understand they're like locked into the bowl stuff. However, if you're talking about the best thing for the league, which is Texas Tech advancing deep into the playoff, getting a bye is the best outcome here. That is absolutely the best opportunity here. You would rather have rest for Baron Morton. You would rather avoid other injuries, potential pitfalls, which could include some terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day where you lose the game. Take all that off the table, advance to the next round, neutral site with Oregon. Now, I saw someone in the chat said the game's not going to be played at the Cotton Bowl. I had not seen actually where the game was going to be. So if somebody can help me out with that, like, I could pop on Twitter and look for it really quick, but that would make things pretty boring for you. So if someone in the chat wants to tell me where that game is going to be played, that would certainly be helpful. Let's get to TM Gel 1. And by the way, if you want to be like TM Gel 1, you can submit a super chat by clicking the $sign below the chat box. Appreciate all of you guys who do that. Even if you're not inclined to do that, totally cool. Just like the video, subscribe to the channel. I talk college football from a Big 12 perspective all the time here. Would love to have you around. Multiple live streams a week during the football season. And I've also got the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter, which you can sign up for at ofbnews.com or click the link in the description of this video to do that. Plus, if you're not watching live, hit me up on Venmo, John-Kurtz-4. You can leave a question or comment there, and I'll start the next show with it. So TM Gel 1, why didn't Tech get rewarded with the Cotton Bowl? Oh, it was TM Gel 1. Okay, well, perfect. I thought it was supposed to be historical tie-ins, but they sent Ohio State there. Maybe they didn't want Miami to get a home game, but why penalize Tech? Well, Orange Bowl. Orange Bowl is where it's happening. What I know about this is they go from the top down, right? So number one, they try to send to either a geographical advantageous spot, or like I'm sure Indiana got sent to the Rose Bowl. Like, I think the Big Ten champ was always going to go to the Rose Bowl, and so then you go to number 2 and you try and send them to the closest place, which I'm sure at that point then, like, geographically for Ohio State became the Cotton Bowl. And then you go to number 3, which means Georgia, obviously Sugar Bowl is going to be the closest thing for them. And then you go to number 4 and you get to Texas Tech and you're left with the Orange Bowl. So I think that's how it happened. It probably happens the same way, I think, no matter what in the Big Ten championship game, right? Because even if you flip-flop them, Indiana is probably still closest. to a game in Texas. So I think that's why it happened. Like Tech being the 4 seed, you're just last in the pecking order as far as how they're going to do things from like a geographical advantage, which like makes sense. Like, look, I get it. It would have been awesome. I would have loved for Texas Tech to just be right back in Arlington playing a playoff game there, but you got to reward the highest seeds. I'm cool with that. And Tech being 4, look, Kalani Sitake, BYU head coach, said repeatedly in his press conference yesterday, I think Tech's the best team in the country. I wish people would talk about them more like that. I understand why Texas Tech is at 4. And I think anywhere 1 through 4, you want to argue Tech, I'm here for it. I understand. I'm not going to lose my mind about them being number 4 and then being 4th in that pecking order and not getting the Cotton Bowl. So to my understanding, and I was talking to people about this yesterday on site at the Big 12 championship game, that is what happened there, TM Gel. So let's see. You can like the video, subscribe to the channel. Appreciate all of you guys. I see that in the chat. Yes, the trolls have entered the house. Hey, that's great. There are always going to be some here. I would just ask if you are somebody who like disagrees, and I know, look, some people are just going to troll the troll. That's fine. But give me some counter arguments. Because again, to the beginning of the show, the argument was not, I think that the Big 12 got screwed because BYU definitively slam dunk should have been in, and there's no argument to the contrary. No, the take again was the fact that BYU was not even legitimately included in the discussion is the problem, and that's happened now back-to-back years, and the committee set a precedent that Alabama getting walloped in the conference championship game does not mean that they're punished, and BYU getting walloped in the conference championship game does mean that they are punished. And that's the problem. So that's what I got. If you've got a counter to that, other than to just talk about Big 12 fans crying, I would love to hear it. I'm here for, we'll hashtag embrace debate on this channel here. Okay. Embrace debate with me. You know, I'm not going to do a show tonight. This is going to take the place of the show tonight. Typically I'm doing a Sunday night show. I did want to get to the Matt Campbell thing, right? I told you guys I would talk about that today. The timing of when it became official just did not allow me to actually get you a real take on it actually happening here. I did the video when it appeared that Matt Campbell had been offered the job, but I did not actually come through with a take on him actually leaving. So let me get here. I'm pulling up my notes on that. Sorry, guys. Look, it's brutal for Iowa State fans that Matt Campbell is leaving. I don't think that there is any sugarcoating the fact that Iowa State football is going to take, at least in the short term, a step back here. Matt Campbell was responsible for, full stop, not even close, the best stretch of football in Iowa State history. It was statue worthy. I believe Jamie Pollard, the athletic director, even said that. The guy should someday have a statue in Ames. Because that's how important what he did was. Only double-digit win season ever with the 11 wins last year. Best 3-year stretch in Iowa State history, the last 3 years. 8 of the 11 seasons he's been there, rank among the best in Iowa State history. The guy's been incredible. And he's done it without a ton of help. You know, we talk about Texas Tech and money. Iowa State is out-resourced by a lot of schools in the conference. And Matt Campbell was the great equalizer with that. He would just make up for so much of that. He would do it through a bunch of injuries, right? This year, each of the last 2 years, there were a slew of injuries for Iowa State. And he took them to the Big 12 championship game last year and finished 8-4 this year. Half of his starting defense was gone for the season due to injury by late October. And they still went 8-4 this year, which historically one of the better seasons in Iowa State football history. So he's a total stud. I think he will have success at Penn State. Do I definitively think he's better than James Franklin? I don't know about that, but I think he can be of the same caliber at least, which is not a discussion I think any of us care about as much, but it's a huge loss for Iowa State. It's a huge loss. And I genuinely, I know that I've had my moments in the past of, and this is understating it, I get it, Iowa State fans, I was a troll for sure, starting 6-7 years ago, talking about what the Iowa State K-State rivalry. Like, I played into it a ton, and I had a lot to say about Matt Campbell and a 7-5 ceiling and all that. And I knew the history and how impressive that was at Iowa State. But when it's a rivalry, you dig into it. And guess what? Matt Campbell made me look really stupid by the end of his tenure there, right? Beat me into submission. Whether I matured a little bit and laid off anyway is of no consequence to the fact that he beat me into submission. About the time the Abu Sama Snow game happened, it was just like, well, this is just what's going to happen every year. And then he beat K-State 2 more times after that. Chris Kleiman finished 2-5 with like a negative 63 point differential against Matt Campbell. Great coach. And I know exactly how much he meant to Iowa State football. And I've seen the fan reaction in Ames, and I feel for you guys, man. It's the most brutal part of the sport when you have a beloved coach like that leaves, and you have so much to process. That's the other thing that I feel for like Iowa State fans and players, because immediately within the hour, Jimmy Rogers was announced as the head coach at Washington State, won a national title at South Dakota State before that. Jamie Pollard had that lined up, and I know there's a lot of debate. Iowa State fans didn't seem to love my take, like, hey, that's a pretty good AD that had that lined up and ready to go already, so that you don't have this period of like players wondering what's going on. And Jamie Pollard knew what he wanted to do. It doesn't seem like people are totally stoked on the hire, I guess is a part of the point there and a part of the problem. I understand that's a lot for everybody to process. Jimmy Rogers may be a great hire. He might not be. I don't know that I have a super strong opinion on that. It seems fine. If you can't get Nathan Shieldhouse, which is who I would have wanted to go after if I were an Iowa State fan, I think that's a fine hire. No idea if it'll work or not. But yeah, the odds of him being Matt Campbell are definitely slim. So it's a brutal pill to swallow for a fan base. Probably made a little bit better by the fact that you just beat the number one team in the country in basketball by about 100 points yesterday. So that will help. But what I will say is, I know there seemed to be some frustration about like, not making Taylor Moser the offensive coordinator, the head coach. Jamie Pollard, I thought, at least had reasonable enough explanations in the interviews that he was given about that, where he said, hey, I basically just, it's the same conversation I had with TJ Otzelberger at one point in time, which is I don't think you're ready for this quite yet, but maybe it'll come back around. It did with TJ Otzelberger. He got hired, and that's worked out phenomenally. If your concern is we want to keep guys around on the roster for next year and you elevate the offensive coordinator, it does that. I get it, and it's not a good time to be cratering a program for a couple of years to build it back up. But you also do have to, if you don't think a guy's ready, man, that's still going to hurt you. The bill will come due later as opposed to sooner, but that bill will still come due at some point. You got to go hire. You got to go hire a head coach that you think is right and ready at some point. So I will just say, at least I thought Jamie Pollard had reasonable explanations. I appreciated what he said about Matt Campbell, that, this is not me in like burn it down mode. This is not me saying that he owes us anything. Matt Campbell does not owe us anything. He stuck around for over a decade when he had multiple job opportunities, NFL and college, to leave, and he didn't. And so I appreciate that perspective a lot from Jamie Pollard. And I get it if you're a fan and you're not there yet. You don't want to have that perspective. You want to burn everything down and be angry. I totally get it, man. I totally get it. But I do think that is ultimately the correct take here about Matt Campbell. Guy did unbelievable work there. And, it's a Penn State job. Like, I know it's trust the process, and I love what I have in Ames and all that. It does seem like the family part was legit. What Jamie Pollard talked about, that his wife in particular, I think, has some family that's, having some health issues, that living in State College, Pennsylvania would allow them to see them much more often. I do believe that with Matt Campbell, that's a legitimate part of it. I can also believe that, hey, perhaps NIL support or lack thereof, or the way that they were using NIL could be a part of that too. I'm sure there are a lot of factors. But at the end of the day, he stuck around for 11 years through everybody coming, and guys that are staying around long-term like that, like a Bill Snyder, stayed for the better part of 30 years at K-State. That is total exception to the rule. And I think making it 11 years was even exception to the rule for Matt Campbell here. So it sucks. It's tough, but I do think you kind of just have to tip your cap and say thanks at the end of the day. And for the Big 12, it's definitely a loss for the Big 12. As just a Big 12 guy, I think it sucks for the league. It's a great coach that had stuck around for a long time, and it was kind of a point of pride for the league that it's like, hey, everybody and their dad wants to come around and try and take Matt Campbell out of Ames, Iowa, but he has stayed here. He has stayed committed to the Big 12 conference. It's tough, especially when you combine it with like Chris Kleiman, another guy, a Big 12 champion head coach who just decided to step down and retire. You almost lost Kalani Sitake also to that Penn State job. Like, tumultuous time. You want to keep great coaches in the league. There are always going to be people sniffing around in the Power 2 trying to poach your coaches. I hate losing him for the Big 12, but it's just one of the tough realities of college football. You have a guy that's doing that kind of work at a program where historically it's been tougher to win at, and there might not be the greatest NIL support in the world. That is going to be an unfortunate reality that typically will pop up at some point. So, again, feel for you, Iowa State fans. I do. I know many of you won't want to hear it or won't believe me. That's fine. I'm just telling you where I'm at right now. TM Gel, what's up? TM Gel says, I do want to recognize Texas Tech having arguably one of the best teams in college football history. The first team to win 12 games by at least 20 points. Incredible. There you go. Thank you, TM Gel. Good historical perspective to close with on the Red Raiders here. You are correct there. Historically good defense as well. I'm trying to remember the stat Gambling Gauchos had. It's like they had surpassed 2009 Nebraska with Ndamukong Suh as the best defensive effort for a season in the conference. Totally get why. I was walking down the field. I can't remember if I talked about this in the postgame, but I walked down on the sideline in warmups and was hanging around Texas Tech. Like, dude, they just have some freaks. You go stand at field level next to them. Just freaks. I mean, even like, I'm looking at them like handing the ball off to Terrence Carter at one point yesterday, or kind of using him in like a screen game. He's a tight end, but I mean, like Terrence Carter was massive. Like, just Lee Hunter. I walked right past. If you guys follow me on Instagram, I think might have been the only place. No, I posted it on Twitter at J. Okurtz. At J. Okurtz, follow me there on Twitter. I posted that video where I was like in the tunnel. I randomly wound up in the tunnel the same time Tech was coming out on the field at one point, and I'm right next to Lee Hunter, and I'm just like, dude, what? It's like, this dude is going to run me over. Terrence Carter actually almost did run me over, and that's why the video got a little shaky there for a moment. So, yeah, makes sense that they have a historically good defense. Those guys are monsters. All right, TM Gel, thank you for your support. Pacific Northwest U, congrats to BYU being repped by Jake Retzloff in the playoff. That's a pretty good little dig, Pacific Northwest U. I will give you that. That's a pretty good dig. Jake Retzloff and Tulane do make it to the college football playoff after all that. In some ways, he gets the last laugh. But this is why I say, yeah, I get it, Pacific Northwest U. That's crazy. That's a good dig. But this is why I get frustrated about it. It's like BYU season going to the Alma Bowl or the Pop-Tarts Bowl. It just does not seem befitting of what that season actually was. But, hey, it is what it is. That's going to wrap it up for me, guys. Please like the video. Subscribe to the channel. I will definitely stay in touch with you here. Hope this will suffice for your Sunday video, little instant reaction to the playoff rankings. Let me know what you think in the comments. John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo. If you have a question or comment you want me to get to on the next live show, subscribe to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter at ofbnews.com, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday, ladies and gentlemen. I will talk to you all very soon.